Good morning to you. I'm Danilo Evangelista, and welcome to our tropical weather outlook video for today, Thursday, June 5th. Almost forgot what day it is, but it is Thursday, June 5th, 2025. On today's video, we're going to be talking about the Pacific mainly because that's where most of the activity is right now. But it looks like our next storm is likely on the way here over the next week in the Pacific. And really quickly, just to show you, nothing is expected in the Atlantic. For now, all of the activity is focused on the Pacific. We have an area of interest. The National Hurricane Center has this at an 80% chance of formation over the next week. So very likely, or at least more likely than not, that we are probably going to get tropical development here, and likely our next named storm in the Eastern Pacific, which would be Barbara, if it does form. And of course, the National Hurricane Center says it is a large area of disorganized showers and thunderstorms located several hundred miles south of the southern Mexico coastline and is associated with a broad area of low pressure. And of course, the main focus of today's video, environmental conditions appear conducive for development, and a tropical depression will likely form over the weekend. And the good news is that this will probably stay west-northwestward. If it does form, as once again it likely will, staying away from the Mexican coastline, so those in Mexico will not have to worry about a direct impact from whatever does form, of course, except for rip currents and potentially higher waves, which would be good for surfers, but obviously the rip current risk is a risk and a hazard in of itself. It does cost lives, so keep in mind of the rip currents when they do happen. But other than that, looks like whatever does develop will probably stay away from Mexico, which is good. But beyond that, looks like we're going to have our next named storm in the Eastern Pacific here very, very soon. Here's a satellite image of how the Pacific looks like right now. Nothing organized yet. All you see is a bunch of showers and thunderstorms right now, generally embedded within the ITCZ here in the Pacific, or as we call it, the Intertropical Convergence Zone, which is pretty much a convergence of winds from the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere colliding, and of course those winds colliding causes upward motion convergence pretty much in the atmosphere and leads to lots of thunderstorm activity, and that is what we have here in the Pacific right now. And I think there's also a tropical wave in here. Yes, a tropical wave that came off of Africa. They make it all the way into the Pacific, and I said this yesterday, but tropical waves that come off of Africa actually play a pretty big role in development in the Eastern Pacific, especially early on in the hurricane season, because more likely than not, they do not develop in the Atlantic. And as I always say, if waves do not develop in the Eastern MDR, out in the Eastern Atlantic, and become long-track Cape Verde hurricanes, that does not mean they will not develop down the line, whether it's in the Western Atlantic or in the Eastern Pacific. And it looks like, I think, a wave is embedded within this mess of thunderstorms associated with the ITCZ. And whatever does likely come out of whatever, is brewing here will probably be a mess in and of itself, too. We're not really looking at a bona fide hurricane really developing in the Eastern Pacific, or at least that's what I see from most of the models. They kind of have this broad, stretched out mess that is competing with other areas of vorticity that might also try to form. So we might also get other development to occur, but it's all going to be stretched out. They're going to be kind of competing, generally a part of this ITCZ mess that's going to try to consolidate over the next few days, and of course produce us or give us our next named storm likely in the Eastern Pacific very soon. But really quickly, a look at the Atlantic. And this pretty much sums up all you really need to know about the Atlantic. It looks really quiet, and that's how the Atlantic will be over the next week to 10 days probably. Beyond that, we'll have to watch again. Conditions might become more favorable here in the Western Atlantic and the Gulf and maybe the Western Caribbean as we head towards middle of the month. But for now, at least over the next week or so, nothing, quite literally, to worry about in the Atlantic. In fact, in the MDR, it looks bone dry. It's dead as a doorknob. There's barely any of convective activity to speak of. and obviously that is helped by the copious amounts of Saharan air that is moving off the continent of Africa, suppressing any sort of convective activity that might try to occur. Once again, this is typical this time of hurricane season, so I wouldn't worry about this having an implication on the rest of the season, but as for now, it's keeping things very quiet, and we're probably not going to get development once again to occur in the Atlantic over the next week. And here's a quick look at the 850 millibar vorticity. And this is mainly to show how things are looking in the Eastern Pacific. I mean, this is a map that generally shows the Atlantic, which once again, you see is very quiet, nothing really in terms of bona fide vorticity or anything try to consolidate. A little bit of vorticity in the far eastern Atlantic. That's probably a tropical wave coming off Africa. Let's actually see. Is there a wave? Yeah, there's probably a tropical wave in here trying to come off of Africa. And then we have this huge mess of vorticity here associated with the ITCZ from South America stretching into Central America, where we also have more general vorticity here. Overall, part of the more favorable pattern that's setting up here in the Western Hemisphere, in the Eastern Pacific, and probably within the next few weeks here in the Atlantic too, but especially in the Eastern Pacific, which is why we're getting all this development occurring, and why we also have lots of vorticity here. And we're going to have to watch over the next several days as probably one of these areas of vorticity are going to try to lift north. A low pressure is going to try to form, break off from this general stretched out mess of vorticity here, once again, a part of the ITCZ, and it'll try to consolidate and become a storm as it moves generally off to the west-northwestward here, or at least that's the general picture. But there's a lot of vorticity. It's all stretched out mess. It's kind of, one big pile of slop. And I'll show you in the models here development of whatever does happen. I mean, you could already see, just look at all this vorticity. Just there's nothing. It definitely does not look like this feature here that we have in the northwestern Atlantic. This actually looks like quite an interesting feature. This is a non-tropical low, although I do bet you if this was later on in the season and maybe slightly further south, we probably would be talking about at least a subtropical system out of whatever low pressure is here. But the bottom line, it definitely doesn't look like a consolidated low pressure, once again, non-tropical that we have here. It's all this stretched out mess in the Pacific, but we'll have to see. Maybe one of these areas, at least as indicated by the National Hurricane Center, likely to lift north, consolidate, and of course probably develop into a storm over the next several days here in the Eastern Pacific. And I'll show you, at least in terms of the sea surface temperatures, at least in terms of the anomalies, they're definitely warm south of Mexico, off the Mexican coast, although the anomalies as you go further out to the west-northwest, out into the general Eastern Pacific, they're cooler than normal, and we've been talking about this for quite a few months now. The Eastern Pacific is generally on the cooler side. This is definitely going to have an impact on the overall hurricane season, especially when you look at the Atlantic, which is generally above normal, and the Caribbean too above normal. But at least right off the southern coast of Mexico here, where we're generally looking at development, or that's where we'll generally expect development to occur here. It's warm, definitely above normal, and I'll show you here with the actual sea surface temperatures, they're definitely above normal too, or at least they're definitely warm enough for tropical development. In fact, much warmer than we really need. We only need 26 degrees Celsius, and here off the southern coast of Mexico, 30, even some 31s. If we had a well-developed system, probably would be able to very quickly, rapidly intensify, but I'll show you here in the models in just a moment, we're probably not going to get a very well-developed system. Maybe we might. I mean, the GFS does kind of have a developed system, but it's generally going to be a very messy situation that'll develop in the Eastern Pacific. But at least from the development aspect with sea surface temperatures, it has that in the Pacific. And then obviously as we get towards the west-northwest, as I showed you with the anomalies map, the anomalies here especially off the Baja. And as we get towards the general northern and eastern Pacific, they get much warmer because the anomalies are much cooler out here. And obviously, you can see the actual sea surface temperatures drop below 26 degrees Celsius, which is obviously not favorable for tropical development. But any development that does occur will probably be generally just south of Mexico, and the sea surface temperatures there are warm. So we can check off the list of favorable factors for it with that. But really quickly though, here are the sea surface temperature anomalies in the eastern Atlantic, and I just had to bring this up because I saw this yesterday. So this is the sea surface temperature anomaly graph for the eastern Atlantic, which is this region through here. It's the MDR east of the Lesser Antilles and the islands. And I just wanted to show you this graph because, boy, look at what happened here. What's going on in the eastern Atlantic over the last several days skyrocketed. Probably had a period of weaker trades, which really allowed the eastern Atlantic to warm up quite substantially. And I find this very interesting, obviously, because it's June. And the fact that we had a huge spike in sea surface temperature anomalies here in the last several days, definitely something to take note of, especially now that we're in hurricane season, so these sea surface temperature anomalies actually matter. Although, even though obviously it is important, I should actually mention, we are still early on in the season, so, I mean, these sea surface temperature anomalies will probably fluctuate a little bit, especially given early on in the hurricane season. Trade winds are still very strong, so that has an effect on sea surface temperature anomalies, and also we have Saharan air, and dust outbreaks that come off of Africa, which also have a huge impact on sea surface temperature anomalies in the Atlantic too. And it actually has more of an impact on the data we could collect, because a lot of the data for these sea surface temperature maps that I show you, they're actually satellite-based data of sea surface temperatures, not actual, buoy recordings. I think some of them might be, but a lot of the data is satellite oriented or satellite based. And when you have these dust outbreaks, you can just imagine it has an effect. It contaminates the satellite data that we get from these sea surface temperatures, and that results in these huge swings in sea surface temperature maps, especially early on in the season when we have a lot of these Saharan air outbreaks, which I assume there's probably one ongoing right now. And I mention that because at least today's map, or the latest plot updated as of yesterday, because the Coral Reef Watch sea surface temperature anomaly map always updates a day behind. I still don't know why that is, honestly. It's been like that since the beginning of time, or at least since the beginning of the NOAA Coral Reef Watch map, when they first, put it online several years ago. It would always update a day behind. I guess that's better because the map before then updated only every few days, so we would only get an actual map every few days. I think it was on Monday and Thursdays when the map would come out. But the NOAA Coral Reef Watch updates every day, although it updates a day behind. But it's only a day behind, so I don't think it matters. But the latest plot as of yesterday looks like it's probably headed for a huge crash once again. So fluctuations are going to happen, but it's very interesting nonetheless. We saw a huge spike over the last several days. Does it mean something for hurricane season? We'll see. Let's take a look at the GFS, though, to show you, at least over the next several days, what's going to brew in the eastern Pacific. And let's just take it out into time here. Over the next 24 to 48 hours, that's when especially around 48 hours out, we really see development occur in the eastern Pacific. But as I mentioned to you, it's going to be a part of this mess associated with the ITCZ here, because we have one main area that develops, and I think this is the area back to the east here that the National Hurricane Center has tagged. But very interestingly enough, at least on the latest GFS, they have another area here that tries to develop. And the GFS, and I mention it as the GFS because the GFS is notorious for having this bias for just trying to spin up any area of vorticity that it can. But it's not only the GFS that has this weird mess here where multiple areas of vorticity try to spin up, and then we kind of have a little bit of a Fujiwara effect that occurs here in the Pacific, where this smaller area then ends up rotating around this bigger area, and then eventually just rotates in and kind of combines with whatever main energy occurs here in the Pacific. But at least in terms of impacts to Mexico, because I wouldn't focus yet on any specifics when it comes to the vorticity and what exactly are we going to get to develop here, because obviously just looking at the models it looks pretty messy, but at least impacts to Mexico, whatever does develop does stay off the coast. We might still get some rain and some showers and thunderstorms along the coastal areas of Mexico, but in terms of a direct impact on the GFS, at least taking this out to the next 7 days, no direct impacts to Mexico. Stays on generally a west-northwestward trend, and then eventually, once it gets west enough and it gets into these cooler sea surface temperatures, like I showed you on this map here, as you can see, it eventually begins to die out and disintegrate and weaken. And then obviously back towards the west here, we have a lot more vorticity in general over Central America, generally associated with the Central American gyre pattern that we have here, that is going to set up shop and pretty much be with us for at least the foreseeable future, and that'll continue to help aid development in the Eastern Pacific for at least the next few weeks into June. So beyond this development that we have here over the next several days, we might have something else behind it. And then obviously the question will be, does something try to develop in the Atlantic as we head in beyond the next week or so, as we get further on into June? And let's really quickly take a look at the GFS in the Atlantic, at least over the next week, though. Once again, things nice and quiet. Obviously, we have to watch whatever goes on here in Central America, but beyond that, things nice and quiet here. We have very strong Bermuda high, very strong trades throughout the Atlantic, especially into the Caribbean, and obviously strong trades. We will not have any development out of that. We need weaker trades to allow for a low pressure to be able to form and then close off and then consolidate. And strong trades definitely don't help with that. That's why, especially early on in the season, we really don't look at development in the Atlantic, especially in the eastern deep tropics. And we see that very clearly right here. Very strong Bermuda high, strong trades, and pretty much no area of particular concern to worry about, at least in the Atlantic, over the next week. Once again, all development that we're watching in the tropics for right now is in the Pacific, and that'll likely result us in within the next few days here in our next storm incoming in the Pacific, and probably our next invest area, probably coming sooner than that. In fact, I won't be surprised if that occurs later today. And watch as I say that, we'll probably get it very, very soon. But bottom line, all the activity for now in the Pacific, nothing to worry about yet in the Atlantic. With that being said, not much else to go over for today's video, so I'm going to wrap it up here. Thanks for watching. If you enjoy what you saw today, I would really appreciate if you like, comment, subscribe, share with family and friends. And especially if you subscribe, turn on the notification bell so you can get videos whenever I upload them. Have a great rest of your day. Enjoy the weather out there if it's a nice day. If not, obviously stay indoors. Peace, love, and kindness to you all, and we will talk again back here tomorrow.